Okay. Welcome everyone to the December A Delicious Nutritious Adventure in collaboration with Plant-Based Nutrition Movement. My name is Carrie Bruno. I'm a pharmacist, PBNM board member, and your host for tonight's event. Plant-Based Nutrition Movement is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to educate, inspire, and support those moving towards an evidence-based, whole, minimally processed, plant-based way of eating to improve health and quality of life at all ages. This event is open to everyone interested in health and wellness, whether you've never heard about eating plant-based or curious to try it, or you've already been following this way of eating for many years. We're all here to learn and to help each other. We can always learn and share with each other information that's helpful and practical to make it easier to start and remain on a plant-based journey. And with that in mind, these events will focus on seasonal ingredients and practical tips. And as well, we'll have guest speakers sharing their experiences and healing stories with us. So there are many different definitions of adventure. To most people, adventure means doing something new, unusual, and exciting, or taking a trip. An important part of most adventures is exploring an area and trying new cuisines. We'll be traveling the world looking to various cultures to learn what similarities and differences make them unique. And each culture uses combinations of herbs, spices, and other ingredients to make their food delicious and nutritious. And so we hope you take this adventure with us and whatever your meaning and purpose for being here is. This specific event is held monthly on the third Tuesday of the month, and this program will be recorded and available for future viewing and sharing on the PBNM YouTube channel. These events are free to attend, and we welcome donations to pbnm.org to cover our production costs. If you'd like to learn more information about this group, PBNM, or future events, you can go to pbnm.org. And with that, let me tell you what's in store for you tonight. We have two speakers. Our first speaker today is Janet Pearson. She is also a PBNM board member and a one-on-one plant-based coach. She will be starting us off for about 10 to 15 minutes with our seasonal segment. She's going to be sharing information and recipes involving various types of greens and citrus fruits, which happen to be readily available this time of year. And then our featured guest for tonight is Kale Kozlowski. She'll be discussing various topics centered around food safety and labeling. She'll also be sharing a traditional Polish family Christmas recipe with us. After Carol's presentation, we'll leave about 15 to 20 minutes at the end for questions. Everyone except the speakers will be muted throughout the presentation, and we ask everyone to remain muted to avoid interruptions and background noise. But please use the chat box for any questions you have for either one of the speakers. So without further ado, we'll get started. Janet, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. Thanks for that great introduction. Welcome, everyone. This month, we're taking a trip to Poland, and we will be sharing some Polish recipes that are traditional or non-traditional, but we give you all the traditional memories alive from our grandparents and our parents. And but before we take that adventure, I want to share some seasonal colors and also holiday special cookies that are no bake. So last month on November, we talked about red. And since red and green are the colors of Christmas, I thought I'd continue and talk about greens. Since greens are on most of the doctors that we follow, the plant-based doctors, they are on all their lists of the one thing that we should have every day, or even with every meal. They're on Dr. Furman's daily G-BOMBS list. It's the G, stands for greens. Dr. Greger's daily dozen list says we should have 2 or 3 servings of greens. Dr. Esselstyn's list for preventing and reversing heart disease, he recommends that we have a small fistful of greens, lightly cooked or steamed with a little bit of vinegar for several times a day to reverse and heal the inside of our arteries. So, and these are all evidence-based physicians that you can, if they're new to you and you're not familiar to them, you can research them after the program, because they all have much to say about all of the science and the health benefits. But let's get into the dark leafy greens. I have some kale that I just got out of my refrigerator. And I really was not, I was like, is it going to be yellow? Is it still going to be good? I picked this a month ago from my garden, maybe 6 weeks ago. It's been in a pot in my refrigerator with a bag over it. I washed it and I picked it before the first freeze, which had to be, I don't know when that was, but it's still fresh and green and not discolored. So that tells you how old the kale is that we buy from the store is, because it doesn't last this long in the refrigerator. And kale is one thing that I'm not sure if everybody on the call is, or people watching it, has ever purchased it. But most Americans don't eat dark leafy greens. They laugh at kale. They don't know what it is. It's a very bitter, tough type of green, but it's very versatile and very nutritious. You could eat it raw. You could eat it blended in different sauces and mixes. You could mix it in with a lot of dressings and ingredients. You could add it to soups. There's just endless possibilities with kale and other greens like collard greens, Swiss chard, arugula, spinach. The cruciferous vegetables would be considered green vegetables, and they have special cancer fighting properties, including especially the broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, radishes, cabbage, red cabbage to keep the holiday thing going. So all of those greens can be either cooked, lightly steamed, eaten raw, and they're delicious. And the health promoting properties, wait a minute, I wanted to say something about kale. Most Americans don't eat them daily, weekly, or in fact, ever. In fact, I've never eaten kale. I never bought kale or grew kale or collard greens or beet greens before starting my plant-based journey in 2016. So I admit it. So if you're thinking, I've never bought it, I never grew it, I have no idea what to do with it, I'm glad you're here. So I get it. And hopefully after this presentation, you'll be able to have some confidence to try one of the recipes that I've put links together for you to just click on. They're all oil-free. They're all whole food plant-based. They include dressings and different combinations of kale salads and how to make it interesting. And there was even creamed spinach recipes that I put together. And the way you're going to find the recipes, they're all free. Some of them are my own notes. Some of them are other YouTubers, other people we follow. Some of them have cookbooks. And instead of, I wouldn't retype or copy someone else's recipe. So we want to share the love and just put the links at the bottom of the YouTube video. So it's going to be recorded and added to our channel. So you'll just be able to come back probably tomorrow about this time. Carrie will have that all uploaded and you'll be able to click on some of the links. But let me give you some of the titles that I thought would be interesting. I have a kale butternut squash with pecans and pomegranate with a maple mustard dressing and hemp seeds. Doesn't that sound yummy that you could put on a holiday table? I also have found creamed kale with cashew sauce, which is a cashew type sauce is very popular with the plant-based world. And I have a holiday stuffing with spinach and kale added to it. I have a holiday morning quiche using tofu as the egg substitute. Add greens and veggies, whatever you have on hand. And that recipe happens to have some oil in it. So I would just recommend, and I have this note too, so you don't have to take notes or anything. All of this is going to be in the notes that you have access to. But I would substitute the oil when you're roasting vegetables like cauliflower and broccoli or Brussels sprouts. Just save a little bit of the liquid in your can of chickpeas. It's called aquafaba, F-A-V-A, which means water, bean water, basically in Spanish. And you just coat the vegetables with that, and it allows the spices to stick to the vegetables, and you don't need the oil then. Another good recipe that I found was is called chili with kale salad. And then winter squash recipes. I have a butternut squash soup recipe, which I've made a few times, and there's plenty of different ones, and they all have different spices and different things you could add to it. And then I have one of my favorite salad recipes. It's from the Forks Over Knives website. It has kale. I add kale to it, but it has red cabbage, pomegranates, citrus, and the dressing is really simple with just some lemon. And that's one of my favorite recipes. If anyone has ever tried it before, I highly recommend it, even for non-vegan family members, because it's very colorful and it has a lot of flavor to it. That's what we want to focus on when we are using things like greens and more on the bitter side. And one thing about kale, it comes with a very thick stem. When you have little pieces like this, you could just cut the whole thing off. But the tougher stem, usually I just grab the stem with one hand and I grab it and I just pull it off like that. Because these are from my garden, if you weren't here in the beginning, and I picked them about 6 weeks ago, and they're still fresh from my refrigerator. So I wanted to show you that little trick. And then a trick that I use for spinach to last longer, I buy spinach in the big containers from the stores. I always look for organic. And what I do, as soon as I get it home from the store, because it is all washed and ready to go, I just take a white paper towel and I lay it on top, and it keeps the moisture, absorbs the moisture in the greens, because that's what's going to get them very slimy if you don't eat them right away, based on how old they are. And this one, I have, you can see a little bit left. That the date on this is December 16th, so yesterday. So I almost finished with it. But the spinach, you just add it to your pot, and you could add the whole pot heaping, put the lid on. 5 minutes later, where did it go? It disappeared. It's basically 5 or 6 cups end up to be a half a cup of spinach. And some of the questions that we've had before is raw greens healthier versus cooked greens? And I found an article that I have the link posted on it, that when you if you overcook the greens, you are going to diminish, specifically with kale, about 5 times of the vitamin C is more prevalent in the raw kale, because vitamin C is water soluble. So you're getting 1/5 of the vitamin C when you cook it. So you don't want to overcook it. So you should lightly steam it, and then, or just put it in at the end. Or I usually put it in my food processor and make it really small, and then it's easier to chew, almost like a chopped salad. So those are my tips on greens. And then the other item that is all over the grocery stores this time of year, citrus. And citrus consists of course, oranges and oranges and lemons and limes and grapefruits. And I wanted to just show some tools that I use that kind of are handy, raise your hand if you know what this is or have one in your drawer. If you have a Tupperware representative in your neighborhood, you probably have one of these. I've used these for probably 30 or 40 years, and it's great for citrus because what you do is it's just an easy, handy thing to get your citrus, get the skin off without your nails digging into it. Because either you have a manicure or you don't have nails. And sometimes it's harder to get some of those rinds off. And if you do, when you buy citrus, if you buy the organic, you want to save use the zest. So in order to do that, you need a zester. And this is a tool that I had purchased when I first went plant-based. And you just go like this, and the zest comes out. And you want to be careful just to get the orange part and not the white part, because the white part is the bitter part. But there's vitamin C, because this is what the sun actually absorbs into these fruits, and the outside has vitamins and nutrients just as the inside. And if you're not using it right away for your recipe, you could zest it and then put it in a little Ziploc bag and freeze it. And then you always have zest, or if you're out of oranges, you used to have some zest to add in your recipe. Some of the other tools that I thought were kind of cute and handy that I've gathered over the years. Does anyone know what this is? Put it in the chat if you do, and if you have one. Here's one. A grapefruit spoon, you're right. And there's different ones. And then this odd-shaped knife that has a curve on it. I don't know if you could see it. It's a curved. You can see the curve. It's to cut around the grapefruit. So these little tools are really handy, but you really don't need it. You can just use a regular knife, small little paring knife. That works fine, but they just make the job easier. And then for lemons and limes, I love this for lemons. And of course, I like this one for limes. And I also like the reamer. So you really cut it in half and you dig it in, and you get a lot of the juice and a lot of the pulp out when you're using the wood reamer. And that really is the best way to get a lot of the juice and nutrients and the pulp out of your oranges. And I don't know if you know, but if you buy oranges, there's different kinds of oranges. Some are easier to peel, some are more difficult. This is the cutie. They're so popular because they're easy to peel. Kids like them. They're great for lunchtime snacks. They're great to send to kids or eat yourself. Have them in the car, have them in your purse. Great little boost in the afternoon. And they come by different names. I think Cutie is a brand name. And if you're looking to juice an orange, you want to get a navel orange. They have the most juice. And then you want to cut it in half and just use the reamer and squeeze it out. And it's really easy. Grapefruits, sometimes it's hard to see or figure out if it's a grapefruit or an orange. Sometimes they're red inside, pink grapefruits, different yellow grapefruits. I just cut it in half, and then I go ahead and cut it up and segment it. And you don't have to put sugar on them. I used to put sugar on my, or maple syrup. But now that my taste buds have changed, I like the citrus just the way it is. And why do you want to eat citrus? You want to eat it because, of course, it has vitamin C. But let me tell you what other things it has in here. It's good for, greens are good for your eyes. I bet you might not have known that. I just had cataract surgery, and all the doctors were saying, you have no inflammation. The very next day, I had no inflammation. And then every checkup, she said, you have no inflammation. I finally, after the fourth appointment, I said, "Is that normal? Do you say that to every patient that has cataract surgery?" She said, "No, I don't. Everybody has inflammation. You don't have inflammation because you don't eat meat." And so, if you know someone having cataract surgery or any type of surgery, tell them about the benefits of a plant based diet because greens are great for your eyesight. And they are also, greens have vitamin C in them, as we spoke about. They have iron, they have a lot of antioxidants, and they're very low calorie. So you could get full with a big bowl of salad of greens and different mixtures of vegetables with under about what 100 200 calories of the vegetables. They're about 200 calories a pound for vegetables, so that is important to know. So my recipes with orange, I just put some information on the nutrition. I'm going to skip over that part since I want to have time for Carol's presentation. And just going to tell you real quick, I added some lemon cranberry balls. These are the no-bake cookie recipes that I thought would be fun for a last-minute treat if you're going to a party. That is one. A chocolate chip cookie dough balls, a 3-seed snack balls, and let's see. Those are the recipes that you could just mix nuts, seeds, dates, some almond powder, sometimes almond butter, cashew nut butter, tahini if you're nut sensitive. There's all kind of options based on all of the sensitivities that people might have when you're going to a party. I know I have one of my relatives is allergic to almonds, so I'm very sensitive to that. So I use seeds when I'm going to bring anything to a party where I know she's going to be there. Hemp seeds are a great option because they have a lot of protein, and even pumpkin seeds are really great because they also have protein. And even though we don't have to worry about protein, that's one of the questions we always get. Where do we get our protein? And we all know there's protein in greens, there's protein in pretty much everything we eat. And we just have to eat a varied diet. Flipping to the Polish recipes, we're going to save that to the end after Carol's presentation. So if there's any questions in the chat, just feel free to add them or any comments, and then we'll read them at the end. Thanks for hope you picked up a few tips, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions or any other things that you'd like to know about citrus and kale. Back to you on Carrie and introducing Carol.
Perfect. Thank you very much for all of the recipes and all of the information. One other thing, I think it's perfect that you paired the greens and the citrus together because I don't know if many people know this, but the iron in the greens is actually better absorbed when you have citrus and vitamin C around. So even better to eat them together. So.
Thank you. Good.
All right, so moving right along, our guest speaker for tonight is Kale Kozlowski. She is a business consultant specializing in food product risks and recalls. She spent more than 30 years working in the food safety and risk management field and holds various licenses and certifications all centered around food production safety. She has also traveled internationally, touring food manufacturing plants and worked with companies as a consultant. So welcome, Carol, and I will give the floor to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction. And Janet, you're making my mouth water. Okay, I will share my screen here so that I do, I have a presentation that goes along with this. Okay, so can you see my screen now?
Not yet.
Not yet. Let me go back and hit the share screen once again. Do I have access to share screen?
I believe so. Double check. Yes, you do.
Okay. Do you see my screen now?
I don't.
Okay, we practiced this yesterday and it worked fine. So One moment. Let me see. Let me try this from scratch again. Okay, share screen. There, that should work.
Yes, now we see it.
All right, I just cleared out another window I had open, so that worked better. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about produce food safety. And as Carrie mentioned, I worked with major and medium-sized companies on their food safety and their food risk in manufacturing, as well as risks in consumers' homes. I've done a lot of training around the world for all different types of food companies, whether they were plant-based or not. But today I'm going to talk about primarily plant-based, so that would be regulated here in the United States by the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. We have two food governing agencies in the United States. The other one is the USDA, but the USDA is meat, poultry, and eggs. Everything else is FDA, so concentrating on FDA only today. Okay. So just to make sure that, and with some of the things I'm going to be talking about, I want to put your minds at ease and put you at rest that actually the US has one of the safest food supplies in the world. In fact, a lot of other governances in other parts of the world copy what the US has done. So there's a group called The Economist, and they actually regularly report on global food security index, and that also includes things like food affordability and availability, but it also does include quality and safety as well. They do this for 113 countries across the globe. And just to let you know that the US has always ranked at the top of that list. And in 2022, it actually ranked a joint first for the food safety indicator. So again, we could be proud of what our government is doing and what our industry is doing to make sure that we have a safe food supply. So just a little, I don't know, quiz here. The thing about food is that we eat every day, we drink every day. So it's not something that we really think of as a risk. I mean, we drive our cars every day, and when we get into the car, we don't really think of it as a risk. But, if you have somebody crossing in your lane, then you realize the risk and you react accordingly. But you really don't think about getting sick from eating the food that we eat. But actually, in the United States, and these are statistics that were gleaned from the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control, they actually track this type of data. So in the US every year, there's about 1 in 6 Americans that actually get sick from something that they ate. It doesn't mean that it's a long-term sickness. It could be, but in most cases, people get sick and recover, shortly thereafter. The number of people that get hospitalized each year for eating something is about 128,000. These are the more serious effects of foodborne illnesses, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And then you would never think that eating something would make you die. Now, we know that with allergens and anaphylaxis, people have allergic reactions, especially to things like peanuts and shellfish, if they do eat that. And those tend to be more lethal than some of the other allergens. But 3,000 people in the United States die each year just because they ate something. And this could be because of a pathogen that they contacted because of the food that they ate. So I just wanted to highlight a few case studies, and these were ones that were highly publicized and very costly recalls for companies. So looking at one of these is, I don't know if any of you remember, but a few years back, this happened in May of 2010, and the outbreak lasted then through the holidays. But nobody was eating lettuce before the holidays because there was an outbreak of E. coli in fresh romaine lettuce. The outbreak spanned across 23 states, but all of the lettuce was actually sourced to, where they finally figured out that it was sourced to two farms, one in Arizona and one in California. But there were about 27 confirmed, and there were 4 probable cases of illness from 5 of those states, and that 14 people were hospitalized and developed HUS. And what HUS is actually, it's a kidney disease, which is, could be deadly. So again, it was something that was very serious. And again, most people stopped eating romaine lettuce because of the scare that happens when there's these types of recalls. And it should be that way as well. You don't want to eat something that could be potentially fatal to you or make you sick. In 2008, there was a huge recall with tomatoes. Again, I don't know if some of you remember if you went to a restaurant and you ordered salads or a sandwich of some sort, and it had normally would have tomatoes on it. They just quit serving tomatoes, raw tomatoes, because they linked a recall for salmonella to these tomatoes. There were 286 hospitalizations, and it may have contributed to 2 deaths. One of the things about this is when trying to track the stereotype, trying to figure out how the outbreak started, what caused it, and so on and so forth, after they actually got into it, they ultimately found out that the outbreak was actually traced to jalapeno and serrano peppers from Mexico and not the tomatoes at all. The problem with that is that the tomato industry lost about $250 million because nobody was eating tomatoes. Excuse me. With spinach, again, don't know if any of you remember about this, but 5 people died, about 205 people were sickened because of E. coli. Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria monocytogenes, and a few of these pathogens are ones that could actually create serious illnesses and possibly even death. And when the spinach outbreak happened, the FDA basically warned consumers to stop eating spinach. It cost the spinach industry, again, about $350 million. They never were able to pinpoint the source of the contamination, but they thought that it might have been linked to the water that was used to irrigate the crops. One thing that happened out of this, so like sometimes when we have recalls, good things actually come out of it. And the spinach industry got together and they, tried to put their heads together and say, how could we make sure this doesn't happen again? So they put in stricter rules for growing spinach, and that included the buffer between crops and pasture areas. And one of the last ones that I'll talk about here is Odwalla. This happened actually in 1999, but the reason I'm talking about this one is that Odwalla wanted to have the freshest, most natural type of juice. They didn't do anything to it. I mean, basically squeezed the juice, put it in a bottle, and stuck it on the shelves. So they had their apple juice became contaminated with E. coli. And what happened, there was a 16-month-old child that died, and then dozens of people became ill. And when this happened, of course, people stopped buying it. The company's stock plummeted more than $12 million. The government actually fined them $1.5 million for distributing product that could make people sick. And that doesn't even include what they lost in lawsuits and sales. So it was a multi-million-dollar hit to the company. But the biggest thing that came out of this, again, the positive that came out of this, was that the company said, we're not going to put our product back on the market again until we can make sure that it's safe. So they actually invented a flash pasteurization process for its apple juice. And now this is something that the juice industry has adopted. That's a standard practice. So, all other juice companies now use this as a matter of fact in their processing. And then just to kind of let you know, like what happens when recalls are, when companies do have recalls, when they have major recalls that actually kill people or make people very, very ill, they're major, the government does have sanctions that they could use to make sure that the companies are made responsible for it. And in just a few years ago, in 2009, the Peanut Corporation of America had a recall that involved dozens and dozens of companies and hundreds of products. They knew that they had salmonella in their product, but they went and shipped it anyway. And so the executives of that company were actually found guilty, and there was a 76-count indictment. The CEO and the president of the company are serving 20-something year life sentences. At the time, one of the executives was 61 years old, so basically a life sentence for him. And then actually their accountant and their operations manager were also given prison terms, not as lengthy, but then they were also given fines as well. So the government can step in and do these types of things. They actually tried to get out of this. They wanted to be retrialed, and it was turned down. So they were being held accountable. And then Jensen Farms back in 2011 had an outbreak of listeria linked to their cantaloupes that actually made a lot of people sick, and a couple of people died. In their case, they were, what is equivalent to like home arrest, but they were also given major fines to pay and had to change their operations. So one of the things that the government can do when they see that companies aren't really following the rules, like, Peanut Corporation putting product out there that they knew was not good, they actually have a thing that's called the Park Doctrine, which makes the officials or the upper scale, the executives of the company responsible, even if they had no knowledge or participated in whatever the specific offense was. And that rule, it was used in both of these cases because, the executive tried to use those means by saying, hey, we didn't know this was going on. That was like some worker on the floor that did this, or somebody else did this. But it basically makes the executives of a company responsible for whatever happens in their company. So again, we as a government have things that we can do to prevent these things from continuing to happen. Just a side note, I won't give a lot of details here, but there was in 2007 a melamine issue with product that was coming from China. And while we may put executives in jail or pose fines and things like that, the executives in China were actually executed because the melamine that they put in baby products actually killed babies. So we don't actually kill our people, but we make sure that they get the point when they are sentenced to whatever is given to them. So I just want to talk a little bit about, how does the government and industry itself ensure a safe food supply? Well, as time goes on, food laws have come out because of something that has happened. Back in the good old days when people were selling elixirs off of the carts that they were peddling down the street, and those elixirs had who knows what in them, it wasn't regulated. And then the government stepped in and said, okay, now, this is the rule for these types of things. But up until 2011, we were always reacting to something that happened in the industry. And I would like to mention that a lot of this also comes out from consumer interest groups. Consumer interest groups will, petition the government or, get a hold of their officials and say, hey, there needs to be a law because of this or this or that. And that's why we now have, like, say, nutrition fact panels on our labeling, or we are actually labeling if it has allergens in the product, or the way that companies are processing their food is actually much different, and because they have to follow different rules. But in 2011, the Food Safety Modernization Act, otherwise known as FSMA, was passed. And the biggest thing about this is that instead of reacting to a situation that happened and then putting a law in place, they took a look back and said, what types of things can possibly happen? And it was all about prevention, making sure that our food was safe before something happened. So it required enhanced partnerships between everybody in the supply chain, everybody in the distribution chain, and then inspections, compliance, and response were a given and mandatory so that these types of things could be prevented before food was put into commerce. One of the things that they did is that FDA has a fresh produce risk ranking tool, and I'm not quite sure. These were the top 11 risks at the time this research was done. I didn't look up most, so pardon me if they're not in the correct order here, but this was actually based on a number of food safety incidents. So leafy greens, because we talked about the romaine lettuce and the spinach and things like that. The sprouts are actually at the top of the list because they live in a high moisture environment. And anytime you have moisture involved, there's a possibility of bacterial growth. So they are at the top of the list. And then, the other ones that are listed here. And this isn't to say that these aren't safe. It's just that these were the ones that had the highest risk if it were to be contaminated with some sort of pathogen. The other thing that they found is that tree fruit crops are actually a low risk. So there were not any major incidents that were linked to, apples, pears, cherries, things like that. So those were actually low risk types of crops. So with FSMA, or the Food Safety Modernization Act, there were actually 3 rules that applied to produce food safety. The first one was that there are now specific standards for growing, harvesting, packing, and holding of produce for human consumption. The second was the preventive controls for human food, and that is making sure that any companies that are manufacturing food for human consumption, that they have good manufacturing practices in place, that they have a hazard analysis and program in place, and also a risk-based preventative control for human foods. And that sounds like a mouthful, but those three things listed right there are just massive categories in their own, with everything that they encompass. And then finally, the sanitary transportation rule, because many times, we don't even think about it, but there's a risk of food being contaminated anywhere in the food chain. So from farm to table, and transportation is one of the important areas there. So we want to make sure there's no cross-contamination, that temperatures are held, at the right temperatures to transport the food, and that, the vessels themselves are clean so that they're not actually contaminating food. But this was the first time, again, that the government actually required a science-based minimum standards for safely growing, harvesting, packing, and holding fruits and vegetables grown for human consumption. So again, it's just not, well, we think it would be better if we did this or that. It is actually science-based. So who do these rules apply to? Basically, domestic and imported produce. So with the United States doing business globally, anybody that they do business with has to abide by these rules as well. And it's produce for human consumption. It doesn't cover like personal farms or people who have their own gardens and things like that. The government couldn't possibly manage all of that. And then also certain types of produce that are rarely consumed raw, because if a product is cooked, it will kill whatever pathogen is in there. And then it doesn't apply to farms that have sales of less than 25,000. The government doesn't have the resources to possibly cover all of that. So again, it's typically for those that are producing vegetables and fruits for sale, or in the marketplace. And actually, those that are eligible for an exemption is if produce companies are selling produce for further processing that has what we call a kill step in it. So that kill step is either going to be a pasteurization process or a high heat type of process, so that it actually kills that pathogen. So that minimizes the hazard and actually reduces the hazard in the food. So the types of produce safety, and I'm just going to give you a very high level take on this, but the key requirements are actually for agricultural water, because water is one of the biggest contributors to that type of food risk. So there are specific requirements concerning the water quality and also the testing. So water is tested regularly. Actually, municipalities are required to give their water reports to companies to see if there's anything that is like anomalous in there that they would need to address, such as like high levels of lead or high levels of arsenic or high levels of who knows what else in water. But they have to make sure that the water is safe for actually not only drinking, but also for the production of these food products. And then there's biological soil amendments that talk about, the use of raw manure and stabilized compost. There are certain requirements to make sure that as we're growing these foods, we're not actually contaminating them as we're growing them. There are key requirements that are actually specifically stated for sprouts. As I mentioned, sprouts are on this list individually because they are in a high moisture environment, as well as in the way that they are grown. So they actually present more risks. There's requirements around domesticated and wild animals, like how close they can be to a produce farm, and the measures that the like say cattle farmers are using to make sure that like manure from their pastures don't run into the produce fields, things like that. Another really important thing about it is the worker training and health and hygiene, because anybody who's handling our food supply can potentially contaminate it, and people who were working in the fields didn't always have the best hygiene practices, so they are taught about health and hygiene and how that is important for safety in foods. And then again, the equipment and tools and the buildings that are used, there are specific requirements on that, because sometimes we find that food gets contaminated because of the type of vats that are being used, or where it's being stored, or the tools that are being used to either rinse the vegetables or to chop them or whatever. So again, there are specific requirements on all of that. And just, to let you know that the government doesn't say, okay, guys, you got to follow all these rules and, good luck. There's a lot of guidance out there, on the internet, and there's also the FDA, or there's actually consultants myself who go in and, you know, teach companies about the food safety and what is required in each of these types of situations. And again, they're always updating their generally accepted food practices or their good agricultural practice guidance. Some of the preventative controls that are necessary are a food safety system. So all major food companies have to have some sort of food safety system in place. And there's, again, this is a huge topic in and of itself, but most companies that I've been with have either been SQF, BRC, or ISO certified. Those are like Safe Quality Foods, the British Recall Consortium, and the International Standards Organization. There is the WHO, which is the World Health Organization, that actually sets standards for food worldwide. Those are the minimum standards, but like in the US and some other countries like Canada, Australia, England, they all have standards that actually exceed what WHO requires. And then things like the definition of a farm, you know, when we say, you know, the government's very precise in making sure everybody understands what they're talking about. So as I mentioned earlier, you know, somebody who is growing for their own personal consumption is not going to be required to follow all of these or be required to have a food safety system. It's a good idea if they do, but the government's not going to come and shut them down if they don't. And then our supply chain program, which we'll talk about in just a second, has become more and more increasingly important. And then making sure that companies have current good manufacturing practices. And again, that encompasses about 15 or 16 different categories of food safety rules and regulations. Anytime we process food, there's an increased risk of having it contaminated. So like anything that's ready to eat, slicing, dicing, assembling, packaging, any things that are like pre-mixed at your delis and things like that. And then anytime there's human contact or if there's unsanitary food contact surfaces. So again, we'll talk about that in a little bit too. But one of the things that I did want to point out was, why is the supply chain program so important? And, you know, we really have a much more globalized economy these days. So we're getting things from all over the world. So we have to be